Hello everyone, this is Daughter Darkness, and today, to celebrate the upcoming release of Final Fantasy XV tomorrow, I am going to be counting down my top 10 Final Fantasy games. For a bit of context, I have not been a Final Fantasy fan for my whole life. It's really only been the last couple of years that I've taken an interest in the series, but I don't do things by halves, so I've played a lot of games, mostly in the past year. The current situation is that I have played 18 Final Fantasy games and I have finished completely 15 of them. Of course, I'm just one person, I haven't played every single game in the series, so it is possible there might be some that you really like that don't get on this list, and it's not necessarily because I don't like them, it's just I haven't played them yet. In particular, Final Fantasy XII, I decided to wait for its re-release on PS4 before playing, and of course Final Fantasy XV is, at the time of recording, not yet out, so of course I haven't played that. As this is a top 10 and I've played 18 games, that means that there are 8 games that do not quite get onto this list, but that doesn't mean I dislike the games, they just couldn't get onto the top 10. So, if people are interested, I could do a part 2 to this where I basically talk about number 11 to 18, but that's down to you. But anyway, without any further ado, let's get started with number 10. For number 10 we have Final Fantasy IX. Now, as a bit of a disclaimer, this is one of the games that I've not yet finished. I'm about 25 hours-ish into the game, some part during Disc 3, so this is potentially subject to change, but I've played enough of it to kind of have a feel for the game and know what's going on. So the positives, it has a very nice kind of art style. It's a sort of mix between the 1 to 6 retro style and as well as the previous 2 games. Plus, we've got a great selection of characters. In particular, Vivi is a really good character so far. Obviously, I haven't finished yet, so I don't know quite what the resolution of his story is going to be, but he's definitely the one out of everyone that has got me interested the most. Really, everything is really good, apart from one thing, and that is the combat. Now, I might as well get this out of the way right now, because a lot of the Final Fantasy games have one specific combat system that's very similar game to game. That is, in particular, between 4 and 9, they have the active time battle combat system. And my thoughts about that is, well, I used to absolutely hate it. I thought that it took out all of the strategy that a good turn-based game can have without really adding in the kind of intensity that an action game has. It's kind of like the worst of both worlds. And I still don't necessarily disagree with that. I still sort of do. I think I would rather the game either be turn-based or action-based. However, I've sort of grown to love it. However, for 9 specifically, somehow it just is worse, I think, than any of the previous games. It's really irritating. For some strange reason, I feel like I'm spending the most time in battle having selected my attack, or having selected a command, waiting for that character to actually do it. They're just standing in the line without actually going and attacking, and it does kind of get frustrating, especially if someone dies and you're trying to bring them back, but because they take so long to use each item, they usually get killed before you can actually get their health back. So that's really the only negative in what has otherwise been a really good experience. However, it's not really as big a deal in 9 as it would have been in virtually any other game, but you're in combat the least. Most of it is dialogue, it seems, to me at least, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does kind of feel like you're taking ages to get anywhere and do anything. But anyway, on the whole, it's a good game, so Final Fantasy IX gets on my list at number 10. In number 9 we have Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, of course a prequel to the original Final Fantasy VII. And as far as positives go, well, as most people I think know, I'm generally more sort of inclined towards liking action games than turn-based games, so the fact that it's more real-time based, it's not completely action, but it is on the whole that sort of general direction, so I actually quite like that. In a way, it kind of reminds me of Birth by Sleep, the battle system. You've kind of got your command deck there with your attack, and then you can put magic and items and stuff all in that one place. Meanwhile, the materia melding system is sort of an evolution of what they had in the original game, but again, that sort of reminds me of Birth by Sleep, which is a little bit odd. The variety that's added to battles, so you're not just attacking and stuff, comes with the weird random number generator thing, which I still don't completely understand having played it. It just seems like a really random thing where loads of numbers come up and then sometimes it goes modulating phase, which gets a bit irritating when you're hearing it constantly, but it does kind of add variety and it does give you some good attacks that are fun to use. As far as the story goes, it's good. Zack is a really strong main protagonist, and I think that it's good that you kind of get a closer look into something which in the original Final Fantasy VII was there but not like put into loads of depth. It gives us a different way of looking at the stuff that leads up to 7. So in particular the Nibelheim reactor and all the stuff with Sephiroth is really the highlight of this game, as well as seeing a younger Cloud who's less skilled, not quite as sure of himself as he is in Final Fantasy VII. But the level up system seems a bit odd. You kind of, like, each of your individual commands levels itself up, and you level up like as you would normally, level 1, level 2 and so on, but it's done through the random number generator thing. As I understand it, it's not just completely random, but it's like if you get 3 7s you level up, which seems like a really weird way of doing things, and I don't know, it just kind of feels a bit off. But on the whole, it was a very good experience, and Crisis Core gets onto my list at number 9. In number 8 we have Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII, which is of course the final game in the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. Now this has a kind of unique setup. It's an interesting way of doing things, a day and night system. Well, that in itself is not that odd, but that you've only got a specific amount of days and you have to get everything done like within those days, which I found really stressful right at the start of the game, but eventually you realise that you've got so much time. I ended up just wasting time in the last few days, and you have loads of side missions everywhere. Like basically the whole game is made up of side missions with the main quest sort of going along in the middle, and the side quests are really like your level progression. They're everything you need to do. You don't level up like you would normally, you gain stats based on what you do in side quests, which does help to sort of flesh out the universe that's in its current state where, you know, everything's not going particularly well. Everyone can live forever but no one can be born and stuff goes bad. And I think it is a good conclusion story-wise to the trilogy. It kind of puts the focus on Lightning, who is obviously the main character of the trilogy. Her central goal of the series is still her central goal now, of course, finding Sarah and helping her. And it shows what happens to the rest of the cast as well. But the one drawback is, oddly enough, the thing which it seems whenever I see other people talk about this game they like the most, and that is the battle system. Yes, I know it's more kind of action-based, but it seems like they just decided against doing an action game at the last minute. Like they had, okay, we're making an action game, and then at the last second they went, no, let's not. So they just give you a heavily limited, slow action battle system that makes even basic encounters really frustrating, while not particularly difficult. I don't think it's terrible, but it's really just not very good. In my opinion, of course. But anyway, Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII gets on my list at number 8. In number 7 we have Final Fantasy VIII, which I think kind of does things a bit differently to any other Final Fantasy game, which is not a bad thing. I think it's a very good thing. The story is very character driven, and I quite like that. There's stuff going on around with the sorceress and Seed and the battles and all that kind of stuff, and that's fine. It's really our 6 main characters that are the focus of everything, and they really do get a lot of development throughout the game that is really enjoyable to watch. In particular, Squall, or as a Kingdom Hearts fan like me prefers to call him, Leon. I often see people complain about Squall, that he is an emo protagonist and he's dull and boring and stuff, but I actually found him quite good, like him slowly coming out of his shell a bit, slowly opening up to his friends. I think it's a really good way of sort of leading the story, and we see a lot of his sort of inner thoughts about he doesn't understand stuff properly, and then slowly starts to as he goes along, and that's really good. The battle system is obviously the same as the standard one, so it's kind of like what I said with Final Fantasy IX, although I think it's a little bit better. Like pressing R1 when you're about to hit with Squall to give more damage and stuff is, you know, interactive stuff within turn-based games is stuff that I quite like. But the problem here is the junction system, which is the focus of all leveling up. I like some aspects of it, like getting your abilities through your summons, and you can choose which one you want each summon to learn and everything. But, well, it has level scaling, which is a bit annoying because it basically makes everyone in your whole party, apart from Squall, really weak, because as he's there more than anyone, he's going to be miles above them in terms of levels, and the bosses are going to scale to him. So I kind of found that certainly in terms of basic attacks, he was the only one that was actually contributing by the end of the game. Meanwhile, despite level scaling, it still feels really grindy, which is a bit annoying because, you know, you have to draw magic to get stronger in certain areas, and it just feels like you're having to do that all the time to strengthen your characters, and it does get a bit annoying. Also, I'll say that it hasn't aged very well. Once I got into the game, I didn't really mind it. It was really Disc 1 that I was struggling to kind of get into the game because of the way it had dated, but once I did, it was fine. But Final Fantasy VIII gets onto my list at number 7. In number 6 we have Final Fantasy VII. I know this is a lot of people's number 1, sort of without dispute this is their best game or whatever, and I really have to say I understand why. I think that it has probably the most interesting and well-designed sort of universe, story-wise certainly, out of the whole series. There's a lot of thought put into everything as far as making the world goes, and giving the universe sort of development and the story. The characters are mostly good. Yuffie and Vincent are kind of pointless because they're optional characters, so you don't really see that much of them. Of course, Vincent gets his own game later on, so it's not that much of a problem. And as far as characters go, Sephiroth, I think, is the best villain in the Final Fantasy series. I know a lot of people say that, but I definitely see why. He's got, you know, the tragic backstory that we sort of slowly learn about as we're seeing him do horrible things. You can sort of sympathise with him, but then since he wants to destroy everyone on Earth, or in the world, perhaps not. It's understandably seen as groundbreaking for its time and a masterpiece in terms of, you know, how everything goes together, but yeah, it hasn't aged very well, which isn't the game's fault, but I'm really glad that this is the one that's being fully remade, because as I say, the universe and everything is so good, but it's just the delivery can't be quite there. For someone playing in 2016 or 2015 when I played this, it's difficult to like really enjoy the game to its full potential. So I'm hoping that the remake can allow me to do that a bit more like people could back in '97. But anyway, for now, Final Fantasy VII gets onto my list at number 6. In number 5 we have, until tomorrow, the most recent release in the Final Fantasy series, that is World of Final Fantasy, which only came out a few weeks ago, but it has really made a good impression on me. As far as the combat goes, it uses the traditional battle system, but it modernizes it well, and wait mode kind of removes one of my gripes because it feels like you can actually think, and you aren't just forced to press attack the second that you can. And the fast forward button makes the battles feel like they're going faster. They don't drag on quite so much. It's got a good, unique art style. It really works well for the game. The story so far has been really good. All of the characters really complement each other. Although one small, the speaking quirk I could mention does start to get a bit tiresome, but I guess you might see for yourself if you ever decide to play the game. As far as the mirages go, the monsters that you catch and use, it adds a fun and different aspect to growth. Although the game sort of convinces me, at least when I'm playing it, to just stick with the ones I get in the early game and just get them really strong, because it's the only way of really keeping their levels up with Lan and Rain. But either way, it's still a fun way of doing things, and even as a more recent Final Fantasy fan, I still get a really nice feeling whenever I see one of the older characters first appearing. It's really nice whenever I see that. But towards the end of the game, which I'm getting on towards the end now, at the time of recording I haven't quite finished, but I'm getting there. But towards the end it starts to rely more and more on the side quests, or the intervention quests, which I don't think are overly interesting. I just kind of try to get through them as fast as possible. I don't really like them very much, and again, as I haven't finished it completely yet, although I'm a lot closer than I am with 9, this could potentially be subject to change, although I suspect that it's going to be pretty much where it is, unless a new game, like one that might be releasing tomorrow, suddenly reclaims the throne, as it were. But anyway, World of Final Fantasy gets on my list at number 5. In number 4 we have Final Fantasy IV, specifically the DS remake of Final Fantasy IV. Now this game has a really good story, there's loads of twists and turns and everything, there's a heavy focus on Cecil, our main character, his background, he develops a lot throughout the game, as well as all the other characters, Rydia, Rosa, Kain and so on. It's got a very simple level up system, it's effective though, standard EXP, increasing your stats and all of that kind of stuff, and they kind of managed to balance it well in terms of how much time each character spends in the party. Of course Cecil spends more time than anyone else, but since he restarts at level 1 halfway through the game, kind of makes up for it, and everyone ends up around the same area, and I like it when games do that. It's generally simple leveling up, they have the augments that you can use to kind of mix things up a bit, but on the whole it's very simple, very effective, I like it. The combat is fine, it's the first use of ATB, and to be honest, I think this DS remake, apart from perhaps World of Final Fantasy, does ATB the best. I don't know why, it just feels like it works really well. There is a ridiculous difficulty spike that I feel like suddenly later on in the game, which gets a bit frustrating. You know, you suddenly go from a point where you can sort of beat enemies in 1 hit or 2 hits, and then suddenly you go into the next room and it's like destroying you. But the bosses and everything are all great. There's a bit of an over-reliance on failure though, which is a bit of an odd thing to say, but it kind of feels like you are constantly being beaten, you're constantly being outwitted by Golbez before it turns out that Golbez isn't even evil and he's helping you, and then you can win. It's like Golbez is the undefeatable person in this game, which is a bit odd. I don't mind it too much though, and Final Fantasy IV gets onto my list at number 4. In number 3 we have Final Fantasy XIII, which is a game that, let's put it this way, has a difficult relationship with a lot of Final Fantasy fans, but I think that it was great, personally. I think the characters were very well written and well developed, in particular Hope. I think he was very well developed across the game, but really all 6 of the main characters. The combat modernized the traditional active time battle stuff really well, was really fun to go through. Most of the game was really combat, so that was good. The level up system I found really rewarding, like the way it kind of, you can gradually get towards each stat upgrade and stuff. It made me really kind of motivated to keep grinding and keep getting as strong as possible. The temporary limits that they do before the Crystarium expands also motivated me more to go, okay, well I want to get this section complete before it expands. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. I think the story has like this huge mythology behind it, but ultimately it's the character's journey and it's a really good one. I understand the complaints about it being too linear, especially earlier on. I don't mind this as much as most people do. As I said before, most of the game's in combat because that's really all you're doing is running forward and fighting. But since the combat's good, I don't mind that much, and I don't mind linearity generally as much as most people do. The main villain is a bit bland, a bit pointless. It seems like he's just there because they needed something to fight. But yeah, as I say, mainly because I really enjoy the combat, but also the main characters, Final Fantasy XIII gets on my list at number 3. In second place we have Final Fantasy XIII-2. Yes, 2 of the Final Fantasy XIII games are in my top 3, and I don't regret it for a second, because I think that the trilogy was a really good one. XIII-2, it expanded on the story of 13 quite well, And I mentioned how the villain was one of the weaker elements of 13, and 13 too has a really good villain in Caius Ballad. Again, like I said with Sephiroth, he's got a story where you can sort of sympathise with him, and yet you really have to stop him. And the combat is pretty much the same as 13, but it's evolved a little bit more, and it's a little bit better. And the story is fairly easy to follow in terms of like getting where you need to go, but it's got more options along the way than 13 had, which is welcome. As I say, I didn't mind it that much in 13, but it's welcome to get more. And I'm the only person on Earth who likes time travel, so I'm happy to have that in 13 too. The main characters, Sarah and Noel, are fine, but I think that the ones from 13 are a lot better. And the level up system is not quite as rewarding, I found, as 13's, even though it's pretty much the same thing. But it's a bit more customizable, so it has advantages. I just sort of like the one in 13 a little bit more. But yeah, I kind of feel like it basically improved on what 13 did well, and made up on some of the things that it didn't do so well on. And the ending is really the thing that pushed it over the edge into second over 13. Because the ending was quite surprising and shocking, and set up Lightning Returns very well. But anyway, Final Fantasy 13-2 gets onto my list at number 2. And anyone who knows me knows what game is coming next, but yeah, let's go. In number 1, we have Final Fantasy X, which really, I find it difficult to describe how much I really love Final Fantasy X. The story is beautiful, the characters are really well written, well developed, and the story really is like heartbreaking, I will say. It's the only game that's ever made me cry, and by which I mean tear up a little bit. I'm not like sobbing into a blanket or anything. It made me cry on more than one occasion. It's the only game that's ever done that, and I even came close a couple of other times throughout the game. So the story is really strong. I think Tidus is a really good protagonist with his kind of like optimistic and sort of cocky attitude, but a little bit goofy at the same time, and I quite like that kind of thing. And the combat is really the only game in the series that I think that the whole turn-based games have better strategy is actually true. I think that the strategy elements in this game are a lot better. Obviously it's not active time battle, it's conditional turn-based, but you can sort of see which turns are coming up next, and it really does feel like a game that makes you think about what you attack rather than just pressing attack every time your turn comes on. The leveling up is fairly simple, rewarding. With the skill tree, I tend to just go on the normal because I prefer that. I don't want to like customize my characters that much, to be honest, but that's just me. And the music is something that I haven't really talked about that much in any of the previous games, because I've just sort of set an assumption that the music is great, because it always is for Final Fantasy. But I think it might even be better than normal in Final Fantasy X. As far as negatives, there's only really one I can think of, and that is the mini-games and the side quests. All are either really tedious and really boring, or they just have terrible controlling, and Blitzball are not very fun things to do. It's very much, you know, the story is the thing that is, you know, great, as well as collecting the optional summons, but this kind of stuff I would rather do without it. But anyway, Final Fantasy X gets onto my list at number 1. So that's it. All my top 10 Final Fantasy games are out, and now I can just look forward to enjoy playing Final Fantasy 15 tomorrow, and see where that might end up on my list in the future. What's your favourite Final Fantasy game? Please tell me in the comment section below, and tell me why. And while you're down there, please like this video if you did, and if you liked it, then check out my other videos, and subscribe to this channel. And as always, thank you for watching.